I've heard so much about the Roaring Twenties. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
The period from 1920 to 1929 is commonly known as the Roaring Twenties in the United States. The 1920s was an age of dramatic social and political change. More than half of the American population lived in urban areas and not on farms. The nation's total wealth doubled between 1920 and 1929, and this growth put Americans into a wealthy but unfamiliar consumer society. Some would say the 20s broke with the traditional American values.
How did the business prosperity affect the economy in the 20s?
In the 1920s, most major industries used the assembly line to increase worker productivity. The government favored the growth of the big businesses by giving corporate tax cuts. This, of course, increased consumerism.
In what ways did it increase consumerism?
As I mentioned before, most of the population at that time lived in urban areas. The culture of the cities was based on popular tastes, morals, and habits of mass consumption. This was not how traditional America was. There was historical, religious, and moral standards that people had in America. Electricity in their homes allowed Americans to purchase new appliances such as refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, and washing machines. Automobiles became more affordable and sold by the millions. Stores increased sales of the new appliances and automobiles by allowing customers to buy on credit.
Can you explain how the installment plan worked?
Due to the surplus of goods produced each year, the installment plan enabled people to buy goods over an extended period of time without having to put down money at the time of purchase. It was known as easy credit or a dollar down and a dollar forever. Some economists and business owners worried that installment buying might get out of hand.
What was the impact of the automobile in America?
The automobile changed the landscape of America. Its most visible effect was the construction of paved roads suitable for driving in all weather, such as the legendary Route 66.
How many automobiles were sold during the 1920s?
By 1929, 26.5 million automobiles were registered to people across the country, compared to 1.2 million in 1913. The enormous increase in automobile sales meant that by the end of the decade, there was an average of nearly one car per American family. The automobile became a symbol of success for Americans as well as American business. The downside of this was some new problems such as traffic jams in the cities, injuries, and deaths on roads and highways. The production of automobiles replaced the railroad industry as the key promoter of economic growth.
One of the things that comes to mind when talking about the Roaring Twenties is entertainment. What developments in the 1920s made this different?
Well, newspapers were really the only medium of mass communication. However, in the 1920s, the radio came to be. It broadcasted music to a few thousand listeners. By 1930, more than 800 stations were broadcasting to millions of listeners across the country.
1920s. What other types of entertainment did people enjoy?
The movie industry in Hollywood became a big business. People loved going to the movies just as they do now. They enjoyed seeing the glamorous movie stars like Greta Garbo and Rudolph Valentino. Movie theaters were built for people to go see movies. Some of the theaters were like palaces. Movies became even more popular when sound was introduced in 1927.
I know dance has always been synonymous with the Roaring Twenties. When and where did it start?
It started in America in the early 1920s and became more and more popular as time went on.
Why do you think dancing became so popular?
At the time, professional dancers were inventing new moves, and dance halls around the country were holding dance contests. Dancing became more popular. People danced into the night while live music played.
What were some of the most popular dances at that time?
The Charleston, Black Bottom, and the Lindy Hop.
How did the Harlem Renaissance contribute to entertainment during the 20s?
The Harlem Renaissance contributed to entertainment during the 20s because at that time Harlem became famous for its concentration of talented actors, artists, musicians, and writers. Their artistic achievement was so promising that it was referred to as the Harlem Renaissance. The Jazz Age came to be during that time.
What were the roles of women in the 1920s?
There were significant changes for women. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote in 1920. This gave a way for women to begin to become a bit more independent. Most women continued with the traditional role of American housewife. However, 25% of women were working as factory workers, secretaries, sales clerk, and telephone operators. The number of women enrolled in college increased in the 1920s.
Were there any noticeable changes with American women of the Roaring Twenties?
Yes, it wasn't uncommon to see women smoking cigarettes or driving cars. This certainly was a change for American society.
Fashion changed in the 1920s. How did this differ from traditional American clothing and appearance?
The flapper look took young people in America by storm. It was influenced by movie actresses and the need for independence. Instead of dresses worn at the ankles, dresses were now hemmed at the knee. The clothing was loose, allowing for dancing and having fun. Hair became a fashion statement too. Women cut their hair short and in a bob, instead of the traditional long hairstyles of historic America.
Is it true that divorce laws changed in the 1920s?
Yes, women began demanding changes in the divorce law. The divorce rate increased throughout the next decade. 1 in 6 marriages ended in divorce in 1930.
It's estimated that between the years of 1914 and 1926, the number of students attending high school went from 1 million to 4 million. Why was there such an increase?
The increase was sparked by the prosperity in the country and greater educational standards for industry jobs.
What types of courses were being offered?
In the 1920s, high schools began offering a wide range of courses, including vocational training for those interested in industrial jobs.
What were some of the challenges for schools at that time?
Teaching children of new immigrant families was difficult. Many of the new immigrants spoke no English. Teachers met the challenge and created a large number of literate Americans. Schools also faced the challenge of having their costs double between 1920 and 1926. Taxes to finance schools had to increase to meet this need.
I know the Roaring Twenties is thought of by many as a time of growth, fun, and prosperities for Americans, but there were many things that weren't talked about a lot. For example, why was there an increase in the Ku Klux Klan members in the 1920s?
It was because during that time there was the Great Migration, which was a big rise in the movement of African Americans from the South to the North. Additionally, there was also a big increase in immigration. Many were not happy with things that ensued with these changes, including race riots, problems with urbanization, and poor living conditions.
Who was part of the KKK?
The Ku Klux Klan was a racist group of white supremacists.
Who did the KKK target?
African Americans, immigrants, Jews, and Catholics were all subjected to attack by the KKK.
What did the KKK hope to accomplish?
The Ku Klux Klan members opposed the dismantling of slavery and sought to keep African Americans in a permanent, stable state of enslavement to whites.
Another big topic in the 1920s that divided the nation was Prohibition. What was it and why was it put in place?
It was a nationwide constitutional ban on producing, importing, and transporting alcoholic beverages.
How long did the ban last for?
It lasted from 1920 to 1933.
Why was the ban put in place and who called for it?
Protestants and other religious groups felt that alcoholism was the root of family violence and political corruption. They felt banning alcohol would cure this. The consumption of alcohol did decrease in alcohol-related deaths.
Is it true that this led to the illegal sale of alcohol?
Yes, a black market for alcohol called bootlegging emerged. Prohibition was profitable for organized crime and mafia groups.
When and why did Prohibition end?
In 1933, Prohibition was repealed. There were several economic effects on Prohibition. The cost simply to enforce the law was staggering. The tax revenue that the government lost on the beverage industry was great. The Roaring Twenties will go down in history as a time of prosperity and wealth for Americans. Many people broke with traditional American values. The auto industry, consumerism, education, entertainment, and women's rights all went through dramatic changes in the 1920s. The Roaring Twenties also had some negative impacts, such as the resurgence of the KKK, Prohibition, the Red Scare, and Stopes Trial, which created some division in America. Unfortunately, the Roaring Twenties ended with the Great Depression. It will go down in history as one of the most turbulent times for the U.S. economy and the American people. The American people lost their jobs, homes, and families. They lost confidence in the government, and hope was uncertain.